Do you meditate?
I should meditate, and I do meditate mostly, but not as much as I'd like to. As a matter of fact, I meditated this morning for the first time in a long time. I go through stretches. I've had a long history of meditation where I've tried many different kinds of techniques of meditating. And as you know, I'm working at the school where our saying is meditate and create. So, but meditation, to be honest, it's difficult. You know, it's a real discipline to get in it twice a day. You got to do it 20 minutes twice a day. And, you know, I'd be lying if I say I meditate every day. Sometimes I fall off the wagon and I forget, or, you know, time passes or suddenly it's evening and I don't do it. But I do benefit from it massively when I do meditate, definitely.
And you referenced the school. This is David Lynch's...
Yeah, so this is the David Lynch MFA in Screenwriting. And basically, David Lynch does transcendental meditation. And he gave his name to a school at Maharishi International University, which is a school that is basically founded around some of Maharishi's teachings and transcendental meditation in particular. And so our motto is meditate and create, and all our students, when they come to us, they meditate and they learn how to do TM, and they also create. They do their screenplays. So yeah, that's where I've been working at for the last 4.5 years.
And what would get in the way of someone having a regular meditation practice?
Again, great question. I would say the busyness of the day, finding the space. It's a little bit like writing. Like, you know, when writing, you have to fight for your space to write. And again, you have to fight for your space to meditate. So I think even if it's just 20 minutes, even just 10 minutes, you know, you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, I'm going to have a cup of tea and then I'm going to get my phone and look at Instagram or whatever. And you kind of forget to meditate. So I think one of the biggest hurdles to meditation is finding the time. But then secondly, the irony is that when you're really stressed, and you know, you've got a lot of thoughts in your head, etc., it's actually difficult to meditate. But that's when you really need to meditate. So I think one of the hurdles for meditation is very often a busy mind, ironically, and just busyness in general. So yeah, forcing the space to meditate, I think, is very important if you can do it. Yeah.
What is transcendental meditation?
Wow. Okay, another great question. Again, I'm not a TM expert. So transcendental meditation is a very simple, effortless technique where you say a mantra in your head that you get given. You just repeat the mantra, and through doing that, you find peace of mind. And there's many benefits for it. But as I say, I'm not a TM expert. There's a whole movement, and there's people who one can go to and look up and, you know, practice TM. I'm not an expert at all in that. So I am at the university. We have a dedicated TM specialist, an incredible human being called Amin, who comes in the course and he teaches the TM side of it, and I teach more the screenwriting side. But I do practice meditation, and one of the things that drew me to teach at this course was the whole idea of meditating and creating. And in a way, it links up to conscious filmmaking, making films in a space of calm and a space of, I suppose, not necessarily almost calm. Sometimes you're angry when you're writing, and that's good, but a space of conscious decision making at some point when you're writing. And meditation does help with that for sure. There have been some studies around creativity and meditation, and my colleague actually, I think, is writing a book on this particular subject, which will be available one day. And there's lots of studies around it. I can't speak directly to why it makes one creative necessarily, but it feels like it, for me anyway, just on a personal level, it feels like it creates space in the mind for ideas to appear. But that could just be me.
Well, I love all this. Let me just play the devil's advocate for a moment, and that is, what if someone says, well, being on a film set, there's no time to find your happy place. It's go, 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 and we have to make our day. Is this really practical? So,
great question again. And I know David Lynch particularly works in his meditation on his film shoots. So he does make sure that he gets his 20 minutes every day. And he's done it, I think, since like 1973. He's been meditating nonstop, and he's never missed a meditation 20 minutes twice a day since that time. Now, David is like this amazing, you know, artist and someone we can aspire to. Sure. And he has clout on his film sets, but he makes sure that he actually works in meditation time. So even when he shot The Return, which was, you know, it was like 18 episodes, 1 hour episode TV show, he made sure that there was a time when everything stopped and he went and meditated. And he actually encourages his cast and crew to meditate as well. So what happens is that he gets sort of a few meditators around him, I think. And then so they understand the importance of it. And so they actually work it into the schedule, which, I mean, we can't do that all the time. I think but So that would be amazing. Number one, if you could work meditation into the schedule, I think we'd all be so much happier. But also, there are quiet spaces on set sometimes. If you're an actor, for sure there is. You can go to your trailer and you can try and find some quiet time. More difficult if you're crew. This does speak for me to a larger issue, which I won't get sidetracked on, I don't think, but it is the pressure of a film set and how sometimes people get pushed beyond their limits and the people, they don't work in the time to either get home in time, you end up late. I mean, this is a whole problem in the industry. But I think it's interesting because you're bringing up something that is like, where do we work in that space for us to be human on a film set? And for our mental health and our personal space, surely we can do that. I mean, maybe I'm being idealistic, but that would be amazing.
Well, I like what you say too about how actors can find a quiet space, because there's sort of this stigma of like, oh, well, they don't want to hang out with the rest. And I can understand, and I'm kind of a broken record with this, but how people would want to take moments for themselves to get themselves together for the role, whatever. It's not really like, oh, they're better than us kind of thing.
No, I mean, I think with acting in particular, actors are often like, empaths. They're very sensitive to the world around them. And I always say, even to my students, like film school students, if you are making your actor carry gear with you and move things around and like be very busy on set, they're not going to be able to get into the space they really need to be, which is why the whole cliche of the trailer and the actor going off to the trailer thing, sometimes it does feel like, oh, they're better than that. It's definitely not that. In my very brief experience of being an actor on set, it's so important to be able to ground and distance yourself from the busyness that's going around you, because when the camera starts rolling and the lights are on and they call action, everything stops and everything's on you. And if you're in a space of mental, anything wrong in your mind, it's going to show in your performance. So yeah, it's really important to get that quiet space. And if it's meditation that some actors do during that space, that's fantastic too.
How does meditation help us create?
So meditation helps us create, I would say, by allowing space in the mind and a calmness in the mind to be able to allow ideas in. That's one thing. There are books written on this, and an ex-colleague of mine, Dorothy Rompelski, is actually writing a book on this particular subject. I'm not an expert in it at all. I know there have been scientific studies that sort of prove that meditation can help. I just know from my sort of personal experience that if I am in a calmer, it's going to sound a bit eccentric here, but sort of open to the universe, right? I've opened up the ability for ideas to come and things to sort of land. David Lynch talks about catching the big fish, which is this notion that meditation is actually like sort of dipping in and going slow and getting down into the deep layers of the ocean. And there are where the fishes lie. And when you catch a big fish, that's when you get an idea that sort of lights up your mind and you're really excited about. And then you can, David talks about collecting all the fish and getting them together, and then you have a movie. If you've collected enough fish, you have a movie. So it's an interesting notion. And he's written a great book called Catching the Big Fish, which is all about this notion.
Can you take a moment to think of a time that meditation had a deep impact on your life?
For sure. My mind goes immediately to, not TM actually, but a form of meditation called Vipassana, which is where you go on a 10-day silent retreat and you meditate a lot. And I went on one of these retreats and I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be, easy because I've meditated before. It was very intense. Day 6, I wanted to just destroy the world. But day 8 or 9, I felt a peace that I've never felt in my life. I can't explain it except that I can go back there right now. If I wanted to just go back and draw from that piece, I can. It's super interesting. And it was like, after that course, when I went back into the sort of real world, I opened my laptop and it immediately died. The screen went, it was like, and I was like, that's interesting. Close the laptop. And then I had to fly to another city and I had got things confused and I actually missed my flight. And I called them to check whether my flight was still happening. And they said, oh, it's happening right now. You're missing it currently. And I was like, that's interesting. Do you have another one? And the woman on the phone was so expecting me to sort of freak out, but I was so calm and peaceful and not in a blissed out, stupid way. either. It was very, it gave me this faith that I can go back to that space of calm. So even in a day-to-day existence, if I'm rushing from one place to another, or stuck in traffic or something like that, I can just recall that moment. So that was a very big impact for me. That I'll never forget that. So that's where my mind goes straight back to.
You've said that the Three Wells technique can be applied to any creative pursuit?
Yes. Okay, so the Three Wells of Screenwriting, when I wrote the book, The Three Wells of Screenwriting, I used screenwriting as a lens through which to look at the creative process. But actually, The Three Wells of Creativity could have been a better title because it can be applied to almost anything. And I'll describe it to you. I'll have to use the Three Wells terminology, but basically it could even be applied in a way to, it could be applied to painting. If you are painting a painting, the first thing you may want to paint is a painting inspired by other paintings that you've seen. So that's in the book, The External Source as well. So you may have seen many paintings, so you may want to paint that. The other way is you can imagine something purely out of your imagination and you can paint that. Or you can have a memory of an emotion that you felt or a place that you've been to and then you can paint that. So in painting, it's an obvious correlation. But what's really fascinating for me is that it actually can expand even to, I would say, even sport. So if you're playing American football or something and you got to do a play, you can draw from all the playbooks you've watched, all the things you've watched, all the tapes you've watched many times to do that play that's exactly like, the play that you've seen. Or you can be very imaginative and create a play that like no one's ever seen before. Or you can actually draw from your memory, and that where it becomes in sport, it's muscle memory. And you do something that even you weren't aware that you knew, or you do have it in your memory, a memory of all those reps that you did all that time. It stays in your memory and you end up doing a play that's based on that. So I do think that the Three Wells of Screenwriting, or let's say the Three Wells of Creativity, can actually be applied to everything. And we can take this further and say photography, cinematography. You can do it for obviously writing novels, etc., poems, all of this. The book itself looks at the creative moment, the moment of creativity. And I do think we're all creative in all different aspects of our lives. So, yeah.
Have you ever seen or experienced someone, or maybe yourself, go into a meditation or a moment of silence and it triggers a bad memory, and then things are never the same from that point? Mm-hmm. And maybe they eventually are worked out?
Yeah, so again, not being an expert in meditation, we do have this come up sometimes with some, it's very rare, but it does come up where a memory that's been sitting there dormant sort of comes to the surface. And for some people, it can be very difficult. And I know that within the TM world, there are actually sort of techniques through which to work through this. I don't know what they are because I haven't had that. I have quite peaceful meditations. I'm very lucky that way. So I've never had anything scary come to the surface. But I'm presuming that part of the healing that comes with that is that if it does come to the surface, if you can share it with your TM instructor or if you can share it with somebody in your life, maybe the idea is to work through it, but I don't know. I'm not really an expert in that. So when you asked me about the Three Wells of Creativity and whether they can be applied to other things, I did actually think of AI and how it works. These large language models and generative AI. If you look at the Three Wells of Screenwriting, the first well is the external sources well. So these are all the movies we've seen and books we've read. AI does that much better than we do. It can read many things much more, much quicker. The second well is the imagination well, where you make things up. Now, one of the ways we make things up is by colliding ideas together. So we take one idea and another idea that are not related together, put them together. So like clowns and a funeral, you put them together, you get clowns at a funeral, and it feels very imaginative, and you're like, oh, I made something up. Now, a lot of people think that's creativity, and it is to an extent. AI can do all of that, and it's getting much better at it than we can in a way. But I still think that the memory well is where interesting things happen because of our senses. So when we experience something, we experience it with all five senses, and it stays in our body, actually, in a way. It stays in our brain, but also in our body in a way that is very experiential. So in my book, I talk about the memory well quite a lot. As a matter of fact, I was going to call it the memory well book, but I changed that because that is where I think the true resonance lies. And it's in a way the thing that AI can't do just yet. It can mimic it until they create AI that actually has flesh and can see things and hear things like we do, which will come in the future at some point. They can't really fill their memory wells in the same way. They have massive memories where they can take all the external sources that they've read and they can create imaginative things. But it's interesting for me that I still think that the strength that we have as writers is to put a bit of ourselves in the work, put a bit of our pound of flesh on the stage. And it's flesh, it's not computer. And I still think that's where some of the strength lies. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing when you mentioned creativity. I thought of the AI thing, and yeah, there is an interesting correlation between the three. I thought of doing the Three Wells of AI, which is maybe another book. It might be coming. I don't know.
That's good. I like it. Yeah, I like it. And show like a robot meditating.
Yeah, right?
I like it.
Oh, I've got it like something like that.
Uh-huh. Well, do you think that the fears of AI are unfounded, or we should be concerned? Or maybe not yet?
I am a futurist at heart. When I heard that there were self-driving cars here in LA, I so wanted to go and get a taxi, but I couldn't because it was a waiting list. But so I don't really tend to fear the future that much. Maybe I'm naive, but I'm aware of. I think it opens up possibilities that we're not even aware. We don't even know where it can go. I mean, as far as I understand, the role of the creative person in terms of the screenwriter is going to change massively, and it may end up not being something that is even around in the way that it used to be before. So I think the fear is understandable, 100%. I do think that the legislation around it is very important to protect writers' works, particularly because some of the copyright material that AI is learning off is copyrighted. So that's an interesting discussion for me where it comes to residuals and how to get money out of AI. If that's possible, that would be great. My gut feel is that I teach my students how to work with it as much as possible, to create pitch decks using AI images, to perhaps shorten up a synopsis using large language models, to try and make your language better, perhaps to even come up with ideas of characters. I do think a symbiotic relationship is what we need. The fear is sometimes the place we go to immediately, and just to be honest, I don't feel that in my own life. I'm kind of interested to see where it goes. So yeah. Just
as a side, you mentioned legislative action. Here in California, we don't use. We're not as We're not utilizing the automated checkout systems like we used to because of theft. So there's new rules around that. Wow. Whereas before, it had come in and I'm sure taken many jobs and reduced how many people were working in the store. But just things like that. We don't know at some point what could change as a result.
And we don't know what other jobs are going to maybe arise as a result of it. Or maybe even, people have been speaking about this a lot, and it is an interesting concept, is that if the AI if there's going to be a tax involved that gets sort of sent to everyone, so we all get our AI money that the AI makes for us, and we all end up living off it's not a tax is the wrong word, but there's
like a universal income.
Like a universal income generated. Maybe that's it. I don't know. We can be hopeful, but maybe the robots will come and kill us, but I don't think so.
or take our universal income. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you believe writer's block is an unwillingness to change?
Wow, great question. Do I believe writer's block is an unwillingness to change? Phew. This is very real for me because I have been struggling creatively recently. I've been teaching so much in the same way over the last 4.5 years. And I've recently adapted a novel, but I haven't created fresh material. And your question speaks very deeply to me, and I'm wondering if there is some truth in that. Maybe the answer is yes. I'm very curious to unpack this a little bit more because I've never thought about it like this before. I do think that play, the notion of play, is the opposite in some ways to rigidity. And rigidity is an ability, where you don't change, where something is solid, and now I do not want to change. Whereas play is like, let's get up and play and let's do something different. And often it's a physical activity that involves movement or exploration or, excitement or. And so I think sometimes play when you play, it doesn't matter if you get things wrong. You see, if you're playing, it's just fun. And so I think maybe in some ways, the rigidity and fear of change can be overcome with play in some ways. And because I think rigidity and fear of change is about not wanting to do the wrong thing or or maybe experience things that you don't like, oh, I don't want to change because, I don't want to move out of my home because I'm in my comfort zone or something like that. So that's I've never thought of that. I almost want to ask you to unpack more what you mean about fear of change, but it's great.
Well, and so much changes when we just get out of our surroundings, even if it doesn't have to be an expensive vacation, if one can't afford it, just to go to another town, whether it's even a town that's, crime-ridden or wealthy, whatever it is, just to see life.
Yeah.
You experience different things.
And I would even say further, if you're sitting at the computer and you're frozen, get up and walk. Just get a walk. Just move from where you're at. And that is change, right? It's a motion of getting off and walking in a park or walking around a river or something like that. I find every time I do that, ideas will come. And something about the rigidity of the writer's block softens. So I do think that's actually a great idea. You could even walk to a river and then meditate at the river and you come back and who knows what's going to happen. But even walking is a form of meditation. But I love what you say. It's about a change. It's very interesting, actually. I wonder if the opposite of this is true. Too much change can also create writer's block. Because, for example, in the world at the moment, we don't know what's going on politically, right? I mean, it feels like anything can happen. And I feel actually, for me, I get some writer's block around that because I'm like, what do I even want to say anymore? Because everything is so terrible. You watch the debate, they call it, that's not a debate, I don't know what that is, but anyway. But things are just mad around the world. And not just in America, I'm from South Africa, it's crazy in South Africa as well. It's in Europe, it's a bit mad, I don't know what's going on there. People are becoming, anyway. But the world is there's a lot of insecurity and there's a lot of change happening. And so I think sometimes as a writer, it's difficult to navigate your space in that space and to be able to clearly express something that you want to say within that space. But, I want to actually ask David Lynch this question directly. And he said, don't worry about it. Have a coffee, go for a walk. You'll write something eventually. He was very calm about it all. He just said, go have a coffee. I was like, okay.
What are the first steps in writing a screenplay?
It does depend on the story that you want to tell. And it does depend on the individual. So one of the things I believe is applying cookie cutter sort of techniques to any story or any writer or individual never really works. So a lot of books will tell you about you've got to do an outline first and the outline needs to look like this. This needs to be the first act, second act, third act, cookie cutter, make your thing, and that's it, right? But I think every story has its own individual genesis within you as a writer. You as a writer are an individual. And so when it appears and how it appears is very specific to the person. So some stories, the first step might be, I'm just going to write some scenes because I'm seeing these scenes in my head. I'm going to write some scenes out. You end up with a big mess. They call it, they're gardening. They're not architectures, It's not architecture, it's gardening. But some scripts are like, I've got this great plot of the story, and then you do the plot first, and then you write the scenes. So I do think it depends on the person writing, what the story is, how it comes to you, and how you create it. However, I would say that at some point, if you're writing a feature film, actually, even if you're writing a TV series, probably more important if you are writing a TV series, scene cards on the walls at some point to plan your story is very important. And that is vital because if you're just gardening and writing scenes for the sake of writing scenes, you're going to just make a big messy garden. At some point you need to go in there with the weed trimmer and just make sure that there's actually a story there because it's grown into this thing and you don't even know what it is anymore. So I'd say the first step for writing a screenplay probably is being honest about yourself, the story you want to tell, and truthful in the way that you tell it. And so that might be doing a scene outline first, or it might be writing scenes first. But be honest with it and know that both have their own sort of limitations. But it's to know yourself as a writer, actually, I think is important.
Okay, if you're a writer for hire, you may not be maybe as into the story. It wouldn't be something that you've chosen, but you would need probably way more structure at that point.
Absolutely. So for many years I wrote sitcom back in South Africa. I don't know how many episodes I wrote, and that was me being a writer for hire, and that was literally like there's no time for gardening. It's just structure, and I had a writing partner. We would meet, we would beat out it, we would do a scene outline, beat by beat, what happens in each scene. We would send it to the production company. They would write back with some of their feedback. We'd do a second scene outline. Then we'd send that back. Then we'd flesh out the scenes. There'd be feedback on those scenes, and then you'd have a script. So I think when you're a writer for hire, it's very different. So you can't be true to your own creative idea when you're a writer. You can try, but you probably won't get very far. I do think that that's when the structure works. And for me, scene outlines are really good at that point. As a matter of fact, one of the things I found with my students is that a lot of people resist them because they feel unnatural as a creative person. You don't really want to think of everything. I don't know how it's going to end. I'm starting the story. I'm exploring this world. But if you force yourself to do a scene outline, it helps so much, because once you've got a scene outline, you can share it with other people and they can give you feedback on it, which is very important. And so you can actually see whether the story works. So I'm contradicting myself a little bit. I'm saying like, yeah, let's be creative writers, but scene outlines, I'm all for them. I think it really helps to just beat through the story. A feature film is a massive beast. We think we can hold it in our heads. We really can't. We have to get it onto the page. So my first sort of gut response when you said, how do you start writing a screenplay? I'm like, put words on a page. Very important. And then put words in a page in a particular order, and then put those words in an order that makes sense for a feature film. And then that's how you write a feature film. That easy. It's easy. It's not easy.
Is that how we, quote, grow up as writers, that we are willing to have some structure? Because, there's so many creative people and they don't want rules. They don't want to be told what time to show up. Oh, there's going to be these worlds and time travel. But then it's just a big
mess.
It's like a big trip somewhere, and it's not really a story.
Yeah. I do think that that's where we grow up as writers. I must say there is something that happens that I've seen happen at film schools where, and of course at the David Lynch MFA, because David Lynch is our sort of patron, we push back against this a little bit, where everyone's like, you've got to do it this way. This is the way to write a screenplay. These are the rules. You've got to be on time. You can't do crazy things with time travel. I'm like, well, David Lynch wrote Ronnie Rocket, which is the script that was never produced, maybe for a reason, because the script's all over the place and it's mad, but he did that, and people are like, well, he did that. And I'm like, okay, well, if he did that, maybe you should be able to do it too. So I think that there sometimes my gut response as someone who's been in the industry for a while is always to say, you got to do it this way. But what I've seen is that some people's creative spirits do get dampened. So it's a delicate balance, because believe me, I've had too many screenplays that are like, oh, it's in the Jurassic period, and then we flash forward and it's like, oh my gosh, you have no idea what's going on, do you? So yeah, it's a balance between the two, actually, I'd say, is that, but we do, when we grow up as writers, like that fast growing up I did writing sitcom for those years, that was very fast, structure. As a matter of fact, now recently, I've had to actually let go of that a little bit and seen, okay, wait, there's space for the creativity within a screenplay. I, as a film professor, very often used to do like, it's got to be formatted in this way. Get rid of all your ings. Make sure you only write what the camera can see and the microphone can pick up. As a film professor, there's gradable things you can impose on a script. And it makes it easy for a film professor to grade a script, because now, this person was writing too many internal states, etc. But I think there's a softening. I've even seen it in current scripts, actually. In a lot of the more recent screenplays, there's a softening around these rules, which allows more space for creativity. So yes, it's all a balance.
I've just, when you were talking, it popped into my head like someone who has teetered with workaholism, and I'm not to apply addiction to some of this, but sure. I kind of am. But that at times people are more rigid and nose to the grindstone, and they can't relax and they can't have any play. And then other times the pendulum swings the other way. I wonder if that's the same with some of these writers.
It's really interesting that you bring up, like addiction, particularly something like a process addiction. So if you talk about something like eating, we have to eat to survive. And there's various other forms of addiction, like love addiction or sex addiction, which is, these are things we do as human beings. And writing is something we do as writers. Now, the thing with like an eating disorder is finding the balance, right? You don't want to go too far where you don't eat anything. You don't want to go too far that you eat too much. It's being honest about what you need and find that middle ground. And I do think the same is possibly applicable to writing, where You don't want to go into the world of just making a mess on the page. And if you go too rigid, it loses its soul in a way. And so it's a little bit, anyway, it's interesting that you mentioned that as addiction, because it is maybe a way of looking at the writing process to find the balance, particularly around like a process addiction. Yeah.
How early should a screenwriter attempt to tap into their memory well?
Oh. So there's various phases that can happen. It can happen once you've got your actual, first rough draft. You can go back at it and look into your memory well. I'll speak on that in a second. But the first thing is in the moment that you're creating. So actually the memory well should be active and alive in the moment that you're creating. So when you're writing a scene that is, for example, I don't know, I always use the graveyard scene for some reason, but I'll go back there, is, you're setting a scene in a graveyard, or if, someone's being buried, and you could just make things up from all the other wells, movies that you've seen, you could make something up, or you could think about, wait a minute, what graves have I seen in my life? What graveyards? Oh, there was that one in a desert somewhere. Oh, that was quite cool. And then you write from that perspective. Or if you're writing a scene where somebody wins, like Wimbledon or something, and you think, wow, that character's feeling really happy right now. How do I get myself as a writer into that happy space to be able to express that feeling of happiness? I can imagine myself into a character. That's what writers do. It's the magical thing that we can somehow do. Or I can think about, when was I really happy? Oh, I was sailing that boat and there was water everywhere and the sun was glistening. And let me write a scene where the sun's glistening in Wimbledon and he takes the water and he pours it over his head and it's like, yeah, I've won Wimbledon. And that emotion, so it is important when writing to access our emotions. And one of the ways we can do that is through the memory well. So as a matter of fact, the memory well is normally applied at the beginning of the writing process and in the moment of creativity. However, there's a second period when you've got a script written. Then you can actually relook at it and go, okay, I've set this scene in a coffee shop where they break up. Interesting. Where was I broken up with before? Oh, in a car. Oh yeah, on the edge of why didn't they break up in a car? Would that be better for the story? Oh, it would actually, because they can park the car and then the sea's in the distance and he's a long distance swim. I don't know, making something up here. But you can then reapply your memories to each scene actually to make the location of each scene better or the emotion in each scene better. So yeah, it kind of happens on both ends of the creative spectrum if you're willing to go there. Sometimes, by the way, all of these things happen absolutely naturally for a writer, most of the time. But if your script is lacking a little something and you're not resonating with it and the readers aren't resonating with it as much as you'd like, you can definitely consciously, actively go into your memories and try and infuse each scene. So a friend of mine, or a friend, actually he's a friend now, but he's an ex-student. He wrote a scene where these characters were meeting and he thought they were meeting in I don't know where they were, some random place. And he said, a restaurant. He remembered ordering off the kiddies menu when he had no money because they were very poor. And he put that in the scene and it worked so well. Suddenly the scene had something fresh that I'd never really seen before, where they try and order off the kiddies menu. You can't order that because you're not a kid or whatever. And there was a funny scene, but it spoke to the poverty that the characters were in. So that's how it works. Yeah.
If you were interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview. For writers, would you say that story structure is 80% of the work?
Yes. No, I'm going to try and expand on that. But
how so?
So, yeah, I mean, I think Sid Field was it who said structure. I feel it was him, someone like that. Or maybe it was McKee. One of them was like, story is structure. And it does seem to be that way. I think here is the thing though. The structure of a story is its own thing for each story. Each story has its own internal logic and its own internal structure that's very delicate, but very strong. And so as a writer, we have to create moments and scenes that fit together perfectly in a particular order. But the order is not universal. The order is specific to that story. So the trick as a writer, and particularly as a story editor, actually a script editor, is to recognize the structure in each story that is unique to that story and apply it to that story. So if you look at a movie like Tar, which is very different structurally, right? A very, very different movie. It still has its own internal logic and its own internal structure. If you remove something or change something, it's going to fall apart a little bit. So I would say that it's 80% structure specific to that film. But again, it's applying a universal cookie cutter to each story is where it gets a little bit problematic. But I would say that with feature films in particular, and again, to TV series to an extent, you've got more time, we want to hold the audience's attention from the moment we have the first frame to the last frame. And that is done mostly through structure. So yeah, maybe it is 80%, but it's 80% specific structure to a specific story.
And forgive me, Tar, I wanted to see that. That was a couple years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and can we just talk about what the story's about?
Sure, if I can remember.
She's a conductor?
Yeah, so in the story Tar, they did something very, very different. She's a conductor who is accused of having an inappropriate relationship with someone who was in her orchestra. But it's very complex. He does something with that film that is purely sort of artistic. As a matter of fact, the opening sequence is like the credits start and they roll. All the credits roll for the whole movie right in the beginning with singing in the background that you found out later the character possibly recorded in a jungle somewhere. And the audience sits there for that 8 minutes or 10, however long it is, and just watches credits. They are arranged in a way that they look a little bit like orchestra members, actually. It's quite funny. The text almost looks like it's arranged in a certain way. So maybe there's something to be said there. But very bravely in the beginning, and then the next scene is like a 10-minute long interview scene where the character is being interviewed by someone, which help in the setup phase. You're kind of learning about her, but it's a long interview. And so that filmmaker is challenging the audiences in a way where structurally you would normally say, like, you can't do that, you can't do this. This is what a movie structure is. But with Tar, it has its own internal logic and sometimes it's very delicate. And David Lynch does that as well. If you look at Mulholland Drive, who knows what's going on a lot of the time, but there's a structure, there's a perfect structure to it that makes sense for that film.
How does structure limit the moment of creation?
So if you're thinking too much about the structure of your movie in the moment of creation, I think you're probably not going to create unique, fresh, maybe resonant material, which you can do if you're drawing from the memory well or these other sources where you're really just being creative. I think structure, if you're thinking about structure from the beginning, it might be that you limit yourself around your creativity because you're like, well, it doesn't fit. I know this has to happen on page 15. We need to have an inciting incident, and I haven't got an inciting incident. What am I going to do? And I feel that you can get into this space of being almost paralyzed by wanting to fit into a certain structure. However, if you do what I said previously about if you know your story has a structure and you've seen it and you're not trying to BS yourself about the structure, but you've seen that there's a structure, that can actually be exciting because you're like, oh, what's coming next? Ooh, this is next, and that makes sense. There has to be a logic and a reason and a rationale for your scenes, otherwise they are going to be cut. But I think, it can be limiting if you're just thinking you're wanting to apply, someone else's formulaic structure onto your work. Maybe it can limit your moment of creativity.
And as we said previously, there is some need for it because then it could just become this experiential mess, and maybe the writer understands it, but no one watches.
Exactly. And your audience, you have to think about the audience. I think one of the things about structure is an unstructured film you may be just focusing on what you want to do as an artist and you're not thinking about your audience. I'm one where when I'm watching a movie, I'm in direct correlation, direct conversation with the director and the writer when I'm watching the movie. I'm talking, the writer is talking to me, the director is talking to me. It's a conversation. If you're just telling me about your world and I can't follow what's going on, you're not talking to me. You've actually done a cardinal sin as a writer, is you're not taking the audience into consideration in some way. You could write for yourself, and some of my best work I've done is actually when I want to be the audience, but I'm still imagining myself as an audience in the cinema, not just somebody creating the work. So Yeah.
Right, that's a good point, because I was just going to say, well, yeah, I'm an artist and I do it for me. I'm not, but someone's got to understand it, even if it's another version of you sitting in that seat. I like that.
Exactly, yeah.
I like that. That's a movie right there.
Yeah.
It probably has already been done. Adaptation.
And that's what I was thinking. Adaptation came immediately to my mind, yeah.
What is plot?
That's such a great question. I know Robert McKee knows. You should ask him. No. Yeah, it's a great question. Because, I think that question, what is plot, is a little bit like what is character and what is plot. Like, are they linked? Can we separate them? For me, plot is one of these terms that has been sort of created after stories were told by story analysis, people who are analyzing story. And so I do think that there's something very magical happening when we tell stories and when we create stories that's very organic and it's its own little thing. And then when we try and analyze them and make them better, we find terms like plot, structure, character, and then, we have all these terms that we apply to it. And so I actually think your question is great because it puts someone on the spot to try and explain, what is this thing plot you're talking about? It's like, it's a series of scenes, one following after another, where, when you link them together, there's some sort of causation between the two that creates a story. You could tell some sort of formulaic answer. But actually what I really like about it is it sort of puts up what's actually going on when you're writing a story in terms of that creative, that sort of organic thing that's, for me, a little bit more mysterious. So yeah, I don't know. I would say, that's why I was joking when I said ask Robert McKee, but I kind of mean it, like ask a script guru who's got a whole section in his book on plot. They might be able to tell you. I don't actually, if we're really going to get down into the nitty gritty answer of it, I think it's a little bit more imprecise than people actually use it as, if that makes sense.
When you say mystery, and I don't need to refer to the genre of mystery, but do you think that human beings enjoy being fooled or led along in their story, or they want to be 2 steps ahead because it makes them feel like they're in control and life isn't so scary?
Wow. Great question. I think it's both, definitely. So I think that human beings have always loved stories. And for example, the story of the hunt was one of the sort of first stories where, someone is going to now come back from the hunt and tell the community what happened on the hunt. And the reason they're doing that is they want to tell you where the animals are and how they got to them. And there's a meaning behind why they're telling the story. And they will tell it, there's a clue. There was a little footprint. We followed the footprint, and the footprint went around a bush, and then the bush was broken. And then we followed the bush further, and then around the corner was a thing, and then there was a cliff, and then we had to climb down the cliff, and then there was the animal, and then it did this, and then we had to use this thing to kill it with. And so there is a flow, and actually in a way a sort of a plot and a story structure to that story. But the way the audience is being drawn along is that they're being given little clues along the way, which I think is why murder stories, like, detective stories are still so popular. They're sort of within our DNA in some way, following clues to find the animal, to find the killer. I think that human beings love that process. And I do think that it's very important to keep them guessing. It's great if you can have them figure it out just the moment before you reveal it, like, I've got it, and then they have got it, and they feel very clever. Of course, you also do sometimes want to undercut them, but the problem is if somebody doesn't see something coming at all, and you haven't giving them information about this thing, it's very frustrating for a reader or an audience member if you reveal something and you haven't given them any foreshadowing, or they've been given no information, and then it's like cheating in a way, that you just make something happen at the end of your story, and you're like, well, because I wanted to make it happen. I feel like that can be cheating, yeah. And audience feels cheated, I guess. Yeah.
And so it's almost like playing a game. If you're playing Scrabble or Candyland with someone and you never win, you're like, well, I don't know if I want to keep playing. Exactly. But if you can win 1 time out of 10.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Just 1 time out of 10. Then I'll keep playing. I'll keep engaging in the conversation. Yeah.
What are some of the mistakes you see students make over and over again?
So I actually do this thing with my current students where I was teaching at the David Lynch MFA in screenwriting, where each week I'd read a whole lot of scripts, and then I would have to give the students feedback. But what I would see is a lot of common errors. So I called them general comments that I would make on all the work. So it would apply to most students. And I've slowly started compiling these general comments. I've got quite a few of them. And a lot of these are very formatting type errors. But I think it's very important. So the biggest error is I think screenwriters forget that screenwriting is writing. It's words on a page. It's really important that you either put words on a page, read words on a page, rearrange words on a page. That's what you're busy doing. You're actually writing. You're not directing or creating a movie. You're writing. And that's the biggest misconception, I think, around screenwriters, is some people think it's like, it's in the movie industry, so it must be fun and glamorous. It's writing. It's words on a page. And so having said that, some of the feedback around that is particularly words on the page related. So one of the first ones is, there's no such thing as a house. And what I mean by that is a lot of students or first-time writers will go, exterior, house, day. And then they'll say, Frank walks into the house, and I'm like, what house? What does the house look like? Is it a double-story house? Is it a mansion? Is it a ramshackle house? What is it? Words on the page, house. You got to tell us what's in your brain, otherwise a casting agent, a location scout's going to go find a location, and that's going to be your house. So there's no such thing as a house. And there's no such thing as a park. There's no such thing as a car. So often in the first draft or first-time writers will go exterior, house, day, and I want to say to them, just please be just suburban house or Dave's house or something. And then in the action sequence, do a little description. One, not a lot, please. Small little description of like a ramshackle, apartment. Or, if it's exterior, house, day. You can use house, but I wouldn't, because it's going to get complicated when they start doing a schedule. I would call it Sam's house or Danny's house or suburban house or something like that. But then in the description, tell us what's in your mind. We're not mind readers. And I think a lot of the time writers, when they're writing, they think they're going to direct the show or something, and so they don't tell us. But just a little description of what the house is going to activate the camera in the audience's brain, and they're going to see what's in your brain, and that's where the communication starts happening. And so there's no such thing as a house. Yeah, that's my number one.
Right, because the house in Home Alone versus the apartment in The Matrix, different
totally different things. But I think they think because they can see it in their head when they're writing, the reader can somehow, through osmosis, pick up what they're talking about. And I'm like, no, we can't. So no such thing as a house, and there's no such thing as a man. Like a man walks down the street. I'm like, what kind of man? Is he a tall man? Is he a short man? Please, what's in your brain? And this actually comes down to semiotics, and this is why it's words on the page. It's like a tree. We know in semiotics, the idea is like if you say there's a tree, you're all picturing something different. And everyone watching this, when I say tree, you're picturing something different. So if you say there's a tree going in the garden, if you're not specific about what kind of a tree, you are not going to see your vision enacted in the way that you want. So be specific, but very importantly, without overwriting. So you can't say there is a lush green tree that has many leaves and roots in the ground. Just tell us it's a citrus tree, or a stunted tree, or a leafy tree. Maybe trees are all leafy. So again, it's where language gets specific, right? But it's use your words on the page to make sure that the reader activates the camera in their brain and sees what you're seeing in your brain. And that's why no such thing as a house, no such thing as a man, no such thing as a tree. Be specific without overwriting. That's my biggest sort of general comment that I get to writers.
Right, I'm thinking of different people that I've encountered, and just one person that I didn't really know, but there was an air of perfume in the air when this woman was around. She was obviously European, and she would walk very determined, and I would hear her high heels. And I just thought, that tells me so much.
Yeah,
I didn't know where she was going, but I knew that there was an intensity, and there was this aura of like femininity around her, very well put together, but I knew it was her. I knew she was around when I sort of experienced that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a woman walking down the street.
Exactly. And that brings me down to another thing, which is that when you introduce your characters and your main characters, there is a golden opportunity to cast your movie. And that is when you say, Frank, in his age or whatever, and then that little description, that 1 or 2 sentences you have when you're introducing your character, is where you can put that thing like high heels, always a scent when she's around. Now, we can't see a scent, but in that moment, we know what you're talking about. You're talking about something else. She's well kept together. She cares about what she's... So all of this is said in that small little sentence. And in that moment, you're talking to casting directors, because that's what's going to be extracted from your script and sent to casting directors to try and find the right person that's in your brain. In your brain, again, it's about activating what's in your brain, putting it on the page so that that eventually gets made. And that's where, if you can capture the spirit of someone, like you've described this woman now, on the page in that short, you've only got a sentence or two, please don't tell me where they come from and their backstory and all that. Because I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the spirit of the human. And that's another trick that I see people getting wrong very often is, I mean, for example, if I say to you, exterior house day, Frank walks into the house. Who is Frank? What is he like? What is the house like? I know nothing. I'm going to impose what Frank is like from my own experience as a human in the world, and that might be very different to what you're thinking. So you got to watch out for that in a way.
Right, and where has Frank just come from? And what is his job? Is he coming home from work? Did he have a positive experience, a heaviness?
Exactly. And we may talk about that later when I talk about the scene before the scene. It's an acting thing about the moment before the scene. But yeah, what does your character bring into the screen? And how can you show that? Carrying a briefcase, the way he walks, is his clothes ruffled? There's things you can say about his character when they enter the scene that tells us a lot more about them. So you can't just say Frank has just arrived home from work. We can't see that. So activate the camera in your brain. What are you seeing? What's telling us that he's come home from work? Well, he's carrying a briefcase maybe, and he's flustered, and he's just flung something over his shoulder and slams the car door and walks briskly into the house. That means he's had a bad day, maybe. So yeah, use the tools available to you in terms of what the camera can see to show us who is this Frank in your brain.
But just real quick, I don't want to say Frank, a Chicago native, 45, who has never met a steak he didn't like. I don't want to say stuff like that. I want to say something carrying the weight of the world, walks in.
And it's a real art form, this, because you can say carrying the weight on the world. How do we see that? We can see it. You can see it. An actor can do it. A production designer can create that. So that's what you're always having a conversation with these people. You're having a conversation with your team. You're not having a direct conversation with the audience in the cinema. You are, but not directly with the script. You don't give your script out to the people when they watch the movie and they don't read it. But you're talking to them, but you're talking to them through a whole production team. And so, for example, the thing you were saying, you can't say that Frank has never met Julie in the script because we don't know that. That's something that you have to tell us through the action. So, yeah.
Are there any other mistakes we should know about?
So, one of the things that I see coming up a lot is, and it can be summed up in this thing, is the order that we read is the order that we see. And I keep saying this to my students because it's very important. Again, it's about words on the page. Is that if you write a sentence like, I'm going to use Frank again. Frank's in this movie. Frank is sitting in the lounge, or Frank sits in the lounge eating his breakfast. The telephone rings, he picks it up, and then suddenly another character enters the scene, and doesn't enter the scene, but just you write dialogue where like Dorothy says, "Who's on the phone?" We're like, where did Dorothy come from? I didn't see her because you didn't tell me where she was in the scene. You need to say, unless you want us to be totally surprised by Dorothy suddenly appearing and saying who's on the phone, you have to say, Frank sits at the table, Dorothy next. So you're activating the camera in our brain by the order that we're reading is the order that we're seeing things in our brains. So it can be applied even more more effectively if, for example, if you do a scene that's say set at a market and you say, exterior farmers market day, and you can say Frank walks through the stalls, fruit sellers sell their wares, an orange rolls down on the floor from one of the fruit stands, Frank picks it up. You've taken us through an order. Our camera in our brain has been activated in order. Now, the power of this is you can change it around. You can say exterior farmers market day, an orange rolls on the ground. Fruit sellers sell their ware. Frank walks through the rows. Frank picks up the orange. You've changed everything around because now we're seeing the orange, then we're seeing the fruit sellers, then we're seeing Frank, then we're seeing him pick it up. It seems really simple, this, but I see a lot of students and first-time writers getting this wrong, where they don't pay attention to the power of the words on the page and how this takes the order that we read is the order that we see. And you can just have such fun with that because then you're pretty much directing on the page, which I know we're not meant to. You don't say close up, long shot, wide, or anything like that. But the order that we read is the order that we see. It's just important to remember. And I think it comes from writers having the scene in their head so clearly and then trying to get it on the page, still having it in their head, but not quite getting it on the page the way it is in their head. And that's always the trick, right? getting it in your head onto the page in a way that mimics what's in your head. So, yeah.
Let's say the orange rolls and Frank goes to pick it up, and the next thing he knows is this $1,000 pair of leather shoes has stopped it. And there's a tall man attached to those shoes, and he says, Frank, it's been a long time.
Ooh, amazing. Yeah, right? That's great. I love it. What a cool scene.
So then he realizes whatever it is. But,
exactly.
but so then we're painting it. It's not just orange rolls, Frank goes to pick it up, a man is standing.
Yeah.
There's more because we're seeing the shoes, and those shoes carry weight.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you have the power as the writer to... If you didn't write that thing about the shoe on the orange and just said there was a man standing there, we wouldn't see that. We wouldn't see that. We wouldn't have that power. We wouldn't have that moment that you have in your head. And that's the tricky thing. Of course, again, with everything in screenwriting, it's about brevity, brevity, brevity. So you don't overwrite, please. That would be a nightmare. But still know the power of your words and where you place them. And then it's the order that we read is the order that we see.
Okay, so maybe shorten that up or shorten some...
Well, the way you described it was perfect, but I can imagine somebody getting carried away by saying like, I've seen this as well in scripts actually, where it's like, now people are like, oh yeah, I can do this. Okay, so the brown leather shoe stomps slowly on the orange while we follow up the leg and the patent, I don't know, pinstripe suit thing and the man. It's like, you know, this overwriting where I think borrowed from reading novels, and which is what most people do. They don't actually read scripts, they read novels, and then they come to screenwriting from having read lots of novels, and they apply the techniques that they've learned at school, even in essay writing, to screenwriting, and they mess up because the next thing you know, they're using flowery language and language that's very articulate, and that's not what we're doing actually with screenwriting. We're clean and clear, precise language with the occasional flourish to let us into the story.
Going back to your early screenwriting days, what were some mistakes you made?
Wow. Luckily, all my early scripts are destroyed. I think probably overwriting to an extent because I love words so much. So I was probably a bit flowery with my word usage. I think, again, not taking the audience into consideration as much as I probably should have. I had a very quick learning curve with the sitcom writing because you had to learn, it was proper, I was paid to write, so it was a very quick learning curve. I think actually one of the biggest errors I made was misunderstanding symbolism. So I think that when you read novels, if you like magical realism or something where like there's all these symbols, everything has great weight and meaning in a novel. It does as well in a screenplay to an extent. If you have somebody trapped in a telephone booth, it could mean something about the script. But there is a symbolic weight that is in a novel that's not in a screenplay. I don't really know how else to describe this. It's a bit abstract. I'll have to probably stop talking. But yeah, there's something about when we first start writing, when I first started writing, I think I expected too much from the audience. So I kind of wanted them to be into my world. But don't you understand that the diamond that she's wearing symbolizes this, and that this thing symbolizes that, and that therefore that's the meaning that I'm trying to communicate to you. So I relied almost too heavily on symbols within the thing, whereas film doesn't always work like that. It should hit us in the gut, not in the head. And that kind of way is in the head. I think it comes from so much movie analysis where you've studied lots of movies and so much reading of novels where like the tree symbolizes something. And one can get, if that's all you're relying on for your meaning, it can be very problematic. Now, David Lynch does that too, right? He has, in Twin Peaks: The Return, there's so many symbols. There's red rooms and jagged lines on the floors and there's all these things that mean different things. But he still keeps us going through the story because he doesn't only rely on those. So I think that's the one thing I did wrong in the beginning, was I was too heavily reliant upon symbols and symbolism without still making sure that the audience was engaged. And that is where you can lose your audience, if you're not, yeah.
Why do you say there's no such thing as an antagonist?
I would say that it's kind of limiting sometimes the way antagonists are spoken about in screenwriting theory. And one of those things is that someone will say, your antagonist should be personified in one person, and they should be, they could be your theme, but they're personified in one person who stops your main character from getting their goals and puts obstacles in their way. And that's the antagonist they fight at the end of the movie, and then they beat the antagonist or not, the end of the movie. Now, I've heard this said a lot, and I've heard a lot of sort of emphasis towards finding a strong antagonist. And if you can't, who's your antagonist? Like everyone will ask that, you give them a square, who's your antagonist, they'll say. And I'm like, okay, certain movies need a strong antagonist. Harry Potter's nothing without Voldemort. Luke Skywalker's nothing without Darth Vader, or maybe even Emperor Palpatine's maybe the real antagonist behind Darth Vader, but Darth Vader is probably the one that springs to mind. James Bond is nothing without Goldfinger or Dr. No or these movies are actually named after the protagonists. I mean, the antagonists like Dr. No and Goldfinger. So sometimes we need really strong antagonists with particular kind of movies. And so I think the problem that happens is if somebody says, who's your antagonist? We create antagonists out of nothing, whereas the story itself is its own unique thing, and maybe the antagonist is slightly different. And I'll explain what I mean by this, is that some movies have multiple antagonists, and some movies have what I call a tardy antagonist. It's like an antagonist who only pitches up towards the end or the middle of the movie. And those movies are kind of interesting. I do think that there's something dangerous about the dichotomy of good and bad, and protagonist and antagonist, and left wing and right wing. And I think sometimes it can result in things like Marvel movies where you have the Avengers and Thanos, he's bad. And then they try and make Thanos they give him motivations for why he's bad, but he's still clearly bad. He needs to be killed. That's what's going to happen to the antagonists. They will be destroyed. And I think that the resulting movies of this dichotomy are actually, they can be fun. Believe me, I love Star Wars and I love all these movies, but they're limiting in what they say about the human condition and what it's like to be a human. And if you look at certain movies like Rocky and The Godfather, and I mean, a lot of the movies in the top 101 movies of all time, according to the Writers Guild, have complex antagonists. When we say Rocky, the first thing people think about is Apollo Creed. He's the antagonist because he's the guy who Rocky fights at the end, right? He must be the bad guy. He's not, actually. Rocky is complex. Rocky has... Maybe the antagonist in Rocky is a little bit himself because he has a little bit of self-belief that's lacking. The antagonist is possibly poverty as well. There are other moments, and the multiple antagonist thing is in Rocky, where Paulie, who's Adrian's brother, becomes a bit of an antagonistic force at some point, and then his trainer, Mickey, also becomes a bit of an antagonistic force at some point, but they're not antagonists like Darth Vader, right? Because that's not what this movie is. So if Stallone was told, who's your antagonist? There's many, right? And Apollo Creed only appears 30 minutes into the film. He's mentioned 15 minutes in by Rocky at some point. I think he sees him on a TV or something, so he mentions Creed's great. So he's mentioned the antagonist forces is sort of mentioned there, but I think there's a problem in this notion of you must have a strong antagonist, and they must be personified in one person who puts obstacles in your hero's way to get a goal. I think it doesn't allow for the complexity, which I think some of the films that maybe didn't even go through typical development processes in the past were allowed to almost slip through. So like The Godfather, which is maybe Michael Corleone is actually the antagonist. He's like a villain protagonist. So he's kind of an interesting one. But in The Godfather, you might say, well, Sollozzo, the leader of the Turk, is the antagonist. Or maybe McCluskey, the police chief who ends up shooting his antagonist. But they all die halfway into the movie. So what is the antagonist who is the antagonist in The Godfather? There is somebody who's betrayed the family, but that question, I think the problem I have is that question is who is the main antagonist? Are they personified in a person, and can that person put obstacles in the main character's way? If you look at movies that are a little bit more nuanced in some way, and Rocky isn't even nuanced actually, they don't have that thing. And I think sometimes when writers are starting to write and they get asked this question, who's your antagonist? Are they strong enough? We end up creating antagonists, and we create good and bad in a way that I think is not that useful. And so what I would encourage people is that, sure, if you don't have forces of if everyone's just wandering around in the world, everything's happy, it's not going to work. We need to have your character needs to face challenges and obstacles and things. But I think the idea of this strong antagonist is sometimes overwrought with some film professors or script writing gurus, and they will say gotta have a strong protagonist. And I'll say, sometimes, but you can have multiple protagonists. if all those protagonists are linking to your theme of the movie in some way, it's very useful. So for example, if you want to make a movie that's like maybe Lady Bird, where the mom is sort of the antagonist in a way in Lady Bird, but there's a lot more going on. You know, there's the boyfriend who ends up being gay, and like, maybe I don't know if he's an antagonist, but he's certainly a struggle, and there's a real thing that she has to deal with at that point. And so it's more like there's not one big bad person in this world. And I think what's happened with even movies like the Marvel movies is they know that this is what people are feeling, so they give Thanos all this like clear motivation. But he's still pretty bad and needs to be killed. And sadly, they need to be killed in a way with violence, which I think is problematic, actually. But I think at the heart of when you set up this dichotomy of good and bad, and it goes back to Westerns, it's like, you know, white hat, black hat. White hat needs to shoot black hat, the end. A lot of movies solve problems with violence. And of course, The Godfather's got a very violent, very, very violent ending. But it feels different to when you have a Marvel movie where how does Wonder Woman kill the guy? How does they beat she beats him up. That's basically what happens. Like all the superhero movies, they end up beating someone up or like destroying someone through violence, which means might makes right, which means the most powerful is the one that's going to win. And it results in a kind of an understanding of the world that I think is not very useful, actually. So I'll get off my high horse and preaching, but I do think there's something there. And actually some movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once was kind of interesting because she was fighting, but in the end she gave the characters who were fighting her what they wanted. I don't know if you remember, there's this fight sequence and she gives a guy a puppy or whatever, I can't remember. And like in the end she solves through violence, but it's a very interesting, it feels to me like an exploration into something slightly different, into looking at the way we are in the world, which I'd love to see more of actually in movies, is like, how can we solve our problems where it's not just one person is right and one person is wrong, but is there another way that we can communicate maybe, or tell stories that have a different dichotomy?
Well, I'm thinking of, let's say, something with financial justice. So if you had like Margin Call or The Big Short, I don't think I remember too much violence. Yes. There might have been a few scenes, but it was more about getting some type of justice or exposing the truth.
Yes, that is actually just so finding the justice for the antagonist is actually great. You know, they go to prison or they, you know, the crime that whatever crime they've committed is met with an equal sense of justice. Maybe that's good. Maybe that is a way of doing it. Yeah, and I like that. Yeah, financial justice, or you know, they must pay in some way, because I'm not saying everyone's going to get along and be fine. Sometimes things are just wrong, and you're like, that is terrible. You're killing all these people. Stop it. And maybe I think that's why some movies have that simple dichotomy. But anyway, my main point is that perhaps there's some freeing in thinking of your antagonists in a different way.
How do you teach your students to write an antagonist?
I think it's a difficult one, because I think really strong antagonists are often the parts of the writer's own psyche or self that they don't like, that they can, if you can do this, if you can find something that you don't like about yourself, because very often when we see something, we're like, oh my gosh, I do not like that person. It's just, they're pushing me away. Sometimes there's something in them that is actually in us, right? And so identifying that for yourself, and this is maybe the memory wall stuff as well, is like thinking like, but what am I? What are the aspects of myself that I don't like that I could put on the screen? And maybe I'm not saying writing is therapy, it really isn't, but there is a way of creating antagonists that are really great, where you can actually explore that side of yourself that you don't like in a way that's freeing and safe within the confines of writing. So I would say, that is something I would say to somebody who they're trying to create an antagonist that's really strong, is like, sure, the problem is if you just say like, well, I'm going to make them this really bad person, and you distance yourself, you end up creating these one-dimensional antagonists. But if you recognize that actually, wait a minute, there's actually something in me that I don't like, and I can experiment with that, you can create complex antagonists that way. So yeah, I would say create antagonists that are maybe not as far from you as you'd like them to be.
Sure, and I think, doesn't it take some self-awareness to realize that? Because, you know, especially, and I hate to throw women under the bus, but a lot of times women won't like other women, and they'll say, I don't know what it is about her, I don't like her. And then what happens is problems are created for that person, but really it's probably something in them that they see, an insecurity in that person, that they go, I don't want to acknowledge that.
Absolutely.
So they take it out on the other person. I'm sure men do it too, but I think you really have to dig deep and say, why don't I like this person? Oh, you know what? I see a part of myself in her. And that's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's really not easy. I mean, I think when you asked me the question, I was almost afraid to respond because it's like, it's not easy to see that. And that's where it gets like therapy world and it gets kind of tricky. But I do think that, you know, a lot of the times writers, you'll see writers talk about this and they'll recognize that they see themselves in the antagonists. And I'm like, yes, this is great, because then it feels authentic and real to me. It feels like you can create something that's going to tell me something about the world, because it's not just like projecting onto this person. They're bad because they're a Nazi or something, you know, and then you get this distance. They're bad because of something else.
Do you think it's healthy for writers to go to dark places in their material?
So it's funny that you ask me this, because meditation and TM, David Lynch talks about this all the time, because he talks about how when he was creating in the beginning, he had what he called the suffocating clown suit of negativity that he wore. And it was really draining for him and difficult. And he was depressed. He doesn't use those words, but he was really struggling. And through TM and through meditation, he kind of like got some distance from that clown suit and dropped it. He still goes to very dark places. I mean, his work for me, sometimes I can't even, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so dark. But he never attaches himself to it somehow. And he would say it's through TM and through meditation, but he doesn't. So one can go to those dark places, but I do think I've seen it, if you do it in an unhealthy way, it can actually be quite dangerous for the writer. However, I do believe if we don't go to these spaces in our writing and we don't explore truth and things that we're really feeling, then we are going to write probably quite bland, generic stuff. And then the power of creation and art is not going to be what it used to be, which was to change the world in a way that's, you know, challenging and maybe different and sharing experiences. So I do think it's okay, but I do think it does have to be done within a safe framework for the writer. You know, it's good to know that you've got a support network. It's good to know that you're writing, you're not experiencing that. It's a little bit like child actors, actually. I have a friend who just had a movie here, Meg, and she had I think an 8 or 9-year-old kid in a movie, and quite intense things happen in the film. It's a great film, but intense things happen in it. And she worked really hard with this child actor to create a very safe space for her. So she would understand what's going on at every point. There's a man wielding an axe, but you're fine. And I know she's just like this. She's someone who's extremely nurturing and extremely amazing, and she created a safe space for this child. So I would say we have a child in us when we write as well. And if we're exposing that child to very harmful material, we need to make sure that we've created a safe space for that child to experience it. Otherwise, there may be, you know, unintended consequences. So yeah, I would say create a safe space for your inner child if you're going to go to those dark spaces. And whatever that is, you know, it could be therapy, it could be friends, it could be meditation, it could be going for walks, but I think it is important. Otherwise, at what cost? You know, at what cost are we creating? At the cost of our own mental health? Definitely we shouldn't, I don't think.
Or watching a YouTube video, you know, I find that, you know, as a Generation Xer, we're trained to not talk about things as much, but younger generations, it's wide open. So, you know, sometimes you can gain a lot from just watching a video from someone sharing.
For sure.
And you're like, wow, I would never have the guts to do that, but wow, this is fascinating.
I know, it's amazing how that happens.
Yeah.
It's really great.
And it helps you then look at yourself, you know, if you can see someone else do it and you go, well, they're not that bad of a person, you know, and they're struggling with something similar. But that would be interesting to look at the antagonist, because they say that the antagonist doesn't, of course, think that they're the antagonist.
Yes, exactly.
They have their reasons for what they're doing. And so then how important is that to show? Because, you know, we're not doing too much backstory because we don't want to know too much about Bob.
Yep.
But then how much are we supposed to know about, I forgot the woman that you said was in the house. And what if she's the antagonist? So we don't really know too much about her.
It's a tricky one to balance. As usual, I think with screenwriting, it's all about the balance. It's like you definitely never want to judge your antagonist. Like, especially if you're an actor playing the antagonist, this is again where it's interesting, this connection between acting and writing. If you're an actor playing the antagonist, if you're judging what you're doing, you're screwed, because you know, you really shouldn't. You're doing what you're doing, you think what you're doing is right most of the time. Although I actually think sometimes if you know what you're doing is wrong, it's even more interesting and more compelling as a character in a way. So yeah, but I think to link up to your question, we don't want to create antagonists that we're judging as writers. That's where seeing yourself in the antagonist is good, because it's difficult to judge yourself in that same way. So
Can you talk about the challenges around getting work read? You have a finished screenplay. You're in the phase of now putting it out there.
Yeah. You know, I met with someone yesterday, this friend of mine who's just had a movie, a South African movie that, you know, screened at the Chinese theater, and it was great, and she's done so well. It's her fourth feature film. And I told her about this project that I got, and I love this project. It's a novel that I've loved since I was a child, like very young, and I've written an adaptation of it. Now I want to get it made. The first thing she said to me was, do you have a lookbook or a pitch deck? And I was like, I don't. I haven't done it yet. I've just finished the script. I think that sadly, the way it's working at the moment, at least, I mean, in South Africa to an extent, but I think it's here as well, is people don't really want to read scripts anymore. They want to see your lookbook. They want to see images and characters and I think that you have a vision for your project that you're going to make. And so it's about collaboration and speaking to illustrators, or maybe getting some images that are copyright free, or maybe even getting somebody to illustrate something for you, or getting hold of a designer. And actually, where we move from screenwriter to promoter of our work, it's a difficult phase. Personally, I just want people to give me money to make my damn art adaptation book. Just give me millions of dollars and I'll make it. It'll be beautiful, trust me. That's never going to happen, right? People want to see that you have a vision. And that's where the lookbook comes in as something that's like a sort of an in-between phase, because I think it can be very limiting to like randomly send your script out to script writing competitions, which are sometimes fine, sometimes not so fine, or hope that someone will read it. I mean, I sent the script to some people, and the people who did read it are people that I really value their input, and they did finally read it and say it was great, but they're not the money people. They're not people who are going to greenlight my movie. So I think the next step in this very weird phase, which for me is often actually a terrifying phase, and it's a vacuum. You've created this thing, and now what? It's scary. It's a vacuum. It's the space of like, be more creative. Now make a lookbook. Now you've got to see what's the vision that's in your head and try and make something that can sell. So like a pitch deck. And I mean, there are YouTube videos on this. You can find out like what a pitch deck is and, you know, how to make one, etc. But that is probably the next phase, because it's a visual industry we're in. And because you want to generate interest, at some point people are going to want to see that. If you don't have contacts or, you know, some connection to somebody who knows somebody who can read your script, at some point they're going to want that. So that's probably my next phase, actually, is doing a lookbook of this very specific vision that I have in my mind. And I'm like, no one has this vision in my mind. But there are other movies that are like your movie that you can draw from. And No Country for Old Men has got a little bit like this movie. I can draw some images from that. And, you know, and so there are ways you can start to do the next phase, which is the translation of your script into the screen. Lookbook or pitch deck is a way to do that. So that's probably the next phase for me.
Okay, let's say you have that completed, the lookbook, the pitch deck completed. Where do you begin to look for the, quote, money people to pitch this to?
Well, again, I want to say it's slightly different in South Africa. I can talk about it, but I don't know if it'll help. But in South Africa, we don't have the studio system. We have production companies and producers. So the next step for me is to get a producer on board who I believe in and who believes in the project. That is the real tricky thing, is finding that producer. And that's all about networking and finding other movies that are like the movie that you've created, see who's produced it and see if you can get hold of them. Now, of course, you know, everyone wants to go to A24 and get it produced. They know that, so they've got gatekeepers, right? So there's all these mini gatekeepers up to stop you from getting to the people that can produce your thing. And it is scary, but this is where networking and connections does actually make a bit of a difference. Is in South Africa, it's a little bit easier to access the producers. We don't have the same gatekeepers. We do, but I've been in the industry now for like 30 years or something, so I have contacts that I can approach. And I'm blessed in that way that there are actually people who would, if I brought them the lookbook, they would look at it. And these are producers who've made movies. Once you've got a producer attached, they are the people who are going to help you get the money. I mean, I don't know how to necessarily raise funding for a movie. I could raise a certain amount, but yeah, that's the thing, is finding that producer. But it's not easy. There's gatekeepers. It's just the hustle, really.
Sure, and there's 20 other people trying to ingratiate themselves to them. Can you tell me, why are you afraid at that stage? Forgive me for my naivete, but why would you be scared? Is it because you're like, I spent so much time on this thing and it means so much to me?
Yep, that's it. It's like, it's a little bit like, I've spent so much time on this thing, it means so much to me, I've created a feature film script. It's this big thing that I've done, right? And now what? It's like, I mean, I don't mind letting people read it. I think it's great. So please read it if you can, but it's getting that interest to it. It's like suddenly you turn from being an artist creator in the room to somebody with one of those blow up things that flap in the wind to try and get attention for your, car wash. You have to do that. And so it's a different space altogether, and it's a tricky one to negotiate.
How does a writer get in their own way, either with craft, the career? Maybe you've seen this from students you've kept in contact with?
I think for me, the biggest way a writer gets in their own way is... Okay, I'm going to rephrase this. I think writers get in their ways in different ways at different stages of their careers as they progress. So in the beginning, sometimes you'll have a writer who's like, it's all about me and my work and my creativity, and it's just all about, it's very like sort of insular, focused on them. And we spoke about this earlier about not including the audience and including the production team and including people, realizing you're in a collaborative process with a lot of people that need to work together, and people are going to give money towards your thing that want return on that money. So negotiating that space, I think very often you can get writers who end up being frustrated people who are just, they're not actually writers. They may have written a screenplay, but their day job is something else, but they're not involved in, they're not opening up to the world of filmmaking that's around them. So you do get people that are like day writers, and then they get stuck in that phase because they think that they have this great idea. Maybe they do have a great idea, actually. Very often they do, but they're so insular that they don't reach out. So that's one way of getting in the way of themselves. If you break through that and you start collaborating and maybe writing for hire on a show or something like that, and you start getting in the industry, and then you're like carrying on, and then you're like, okay, I've got to make this horror movie. I've got to do this. I've got to do that because this is the new big thing, and this is big, and it's going to get money or something like that. And you end up getting too in that world, and you forget about the insular artist. That's where you get in your way, where you just want to make a movie for the sake of making a movie, and you just want to make a movie for the sake of saying that you're a screenwriter. You forget about that little insular you that was actually there to tell a story and to say something that was important. So sometimes people get in their way further down the career where they're just like making stuff for the sake of making stuff. And you know what, it's you actually, then it becomes a thing where you're paying for your bills, and you got to make this stuff because, wow, that's my life now. I'm a screenwriter, working screenwriter, yay. What am I working on? I'm making a police procedural about something that I don't really care about. And then sometimes they get in their way again on a different level, and then you need to like find the artist, right? So this current movie that I've just written, I'm just going to say it's based on this novel. It's an incredibly beautiful novel, and I have to honor the novel and the artistic integrity that the novel was written in, and that has to be on the screen. And so I'm going to be an artist now, whether you like it or not. Most of my life I've been trained not to be an artist, not to be but that's what I have a clear vision now for this. And so I have to get back in touch with that precious self and say, no, this is what I'm going to be making now. And if you don't want to make this and you want to turn it into something else, then I'm not interested. So yeah, it depends on the career. I think you get in your way in different phases of your career, actually.
Are there rituals and things that you do, not to sound too woo-woo, but like you've been trained to be looking at other people's work for a long time, and as an author, what do you do now that this is Matthew's project? How do you take on that new hat?
It's a really great question. And I think it has to do with integrity and sort of, it's going to sound woo-woo a little bit as well, but like, actually David Lynch does this. We keep going back to David Lynch, but he does, he's been tangentially in my life for some time now. And so he really he says, stay true to the idea. And just stay true to the idea, and just got to stick to the idea. And that is it. It's like, I have this vision and I'm going to stick to it. I think a lot of the times in my life I've compromised because I've got no budget, and I'm going to do that. But if you stay true to the idea, you will create something that is artistic and maybe a true expression of yourself. So that's where if I can have the guts to do that, it's not easy for me, but if I can have the guts to be true to my idea, I do think that that's where some magic lies. So that is how I'll try and do that in the future. We'll see.
Do you ever feel any guilt in that, oh, wait a minute, I'm indulging myself too much?
All the time, yeah.
I should be sticking to this schedule.
Yeah, all the time, yeah. It's actually something, let me just change my position here. So actually, I don't know who said this, but it was a really interesting thing. It's like somewhere along the line when we are creating work, it's like sometimes I have this thought, and I have it a lot actually, which is like, who am I to make this thing? You know, who am I to impose my vision upon the world? And somebody said once, well, who are you not to? And I was like, oh, damn, that's deep, because who am I? I have this vision. If I'm not doing it, like who do I think I am not to do it? Anyway, so it was an interesting sort of Zen take on the whole thing.
Right.
But I do think it's interesting. And it's a thing I struggle with. To be honest, this is a real thing that's deep inside me, is like imposing myself on the world and my will upon the world, which is very often, you know, we go through life and you get some people like politicians, and they're just like going to impose themselves on the world. They're going to drive the car, you're going to take the thing, they're going to do the thing. And I'm like, I do not want to be that. I'm like Canadian, I'm South African, I'm like, I'm sorry. It's okay. It's okay if I do this thing. But you do have to get rid of that, because eventually you won't do anything. And if you're constantly like apologizing, or it is a little bit about imposing your will upon the world, but I think with an integrity and idea that you want to create something that's beautiful and fresh and unique and it's going to change the world in some ways, then I think one can impose one's will in the world in a way that creates beautiful art and has a lot of integrity. And in a way, David Lynch does that, I think, which is one can learn from.